Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture. It goes a very long way. If you are a returning listener or subscriber, yeah, so glad to have you back. This Tuesday episode of This is Revolution. I have with me today my co-host, my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour, which will be airing tomorrow with C. Derek Varn. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
I also want to add that we have something for patrons of the show. We wanted to do it bi-weekly, but right now it's when I can get it done. A blog, magazine, essay series, whatever you want to call it. The Crisis Papers, different articles on a wide variety of topics, mainly by me, but other members of the TIR crew will be participating. I think y'all will dig it. I worked long and hard on the layout, and it's free for all patrons that are on the Teenage Anarchist tier and above. We have 3 issues up right now with a 4th coming out this week. Very excited. It's in the editing process right now. Really excited to get that one out. What have you got cooking, Pascal? You've been gone for a little bit.
Oh, man, just kind of watching the elections finally voted, seeing where that's going to be coming out.
And how do you feel about that? Are you excited?
At this stage in the game, do we get excited about these kind of things?
Like this stage in life? No, not at all.
What we do in our politics as content creators.
Well, you may be a content creator. I'm not. I don't like it. I don't like that term. It's very generic.
We create content. We're podcasters.
Not really. I mean, it's just generic. So what is that? This content.
Podcasters.
Yeah, sure. Show host. But content creators, like, I don't know. One day you do a video about putting on makeup correctly, and the next day, you're selling crypto, and then you're selling a betting site. It's just generic content for mass consumption. I mean,
I can understand the position. That's a fair position. I'm not married. I'm not married to the phraseology.
Yeah, don't fall into the trap. Don't fall into the trap. That's all I have to say. We had a conversation today with our booking agent, Ben and I, about putting together a live thing in the Bay Area. And part of the conversation, I don't know how this came up, was we're trying to figure out where Hawk Tua was on the podcast list, because people kept saying she's in the top 3. She's fallen precipitously in the rankings, but in finding out what the top podcasts are, what do you think the number 1 is?
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan. What do you think number 2 is?
Ooh, I can't.
Yeah. Depending on what platform it is, it's like Tucker Carlson, Theo Von.
I'm not familiar with Theo Von. Who is he?
Just comedian. He interviewed JD Vance.
Right wing? Are they mostly right wing dudes?
Most of the shows that have any political leanings are right. By the time you get to anything liberal, I believe it's Trevor Noah has a podcast, or Pod Save America, or whatever. Is it Pod Save? It's Pod Damn, whatever that show is called.
Pod Save America.
Yeah, they're pretty high on the list, but outside of them and Trevor Noah, it's all like Candace Owens is in the top 5.
Candace Owens is doing that well?
Yeah, I was shocked too. Ben Shapiro, the guy that made the comment about the floating Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage or something really evil like that.
He's Killer Tony or Tony Killer.
I think he was number 21. So that's where conversations usually go in the podcast realm. We are, I know. Yeah, our faces were all the same when we were looking this information up. Quite frightening, isn't it?
So that means that there is no What's the highest ranked left podcast?
How are you defining left?
Left of the Democratic Party?
Nobody. There's no one that's in a ranking that you're going to find. By the time you get to 100, it's like there's still pretty big shows in our world. Like the New York Times podcast is ranked pretty high, actually.
Really?
Yeah, take for that what you will. New York Times, there's another big TV station that has, or news channel that's podcasts.
I would think some of the hip hop podcasts are pretty big too. Like Joe, no?
Nope. No music stuff. True crime.
True crime podcasts are big?
Yeah. Yep. No music stuff. But let's talk about rich people for a second. Let's talk about our guest book today, The Titans of Capital, How Concentrated Wealth Threatens All of Humanity. In our current political and economic landscape, the concentration of wealth and influence within the hands of a few powerful entities is a global phenomenon that shapes our societies in profound, often unseen ways. Peter Phillips's book, Titans of Capital, How Concentrated Wealth Threatens Humanity. Also, wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there are links in the description to get the book. Investigates the alarming consolidation of wealth and power in the hands of a few global elites, whom he refers to as titans. This group comprises only a fraction of the world's population, yet it wields unprecedented control over global capital, resources, and even policymaking. Phillips traces how these elites, through powerful investment firms and transnational networks, not only impact economic decisions, but also significantly influence political outcomes, environmental policies, and global social justice movements. Phillips's work offers a sobering look at how these titans prioritize profit over social welfare, environmental sustainability, and democratic governance. Each chapter exposes the complex ways in which economic power translates into political and social influence, often with little regard for the broader societal impact. Phillips's insights provide a foundation for understanding how, as citizens, we might mobilize to change and reshape these systems to reflect more equitable, humane priorities. As our guest on this Revolution podcast, Peter Phillips, will discuss how these forces affect our daily lives, often in ways we may not immediately recognize. We will also examine the broader implications of this capital concentration on global inequalities and the environment, and Peter's insights on potential pathways toward a fairer and more democratic future. Please welcome, coming all the way live from the great state, California, Peter Phillips. How was that introduction, Peter?
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We got to read your book. In doing this, there's a lot of books that we have to read, so I just have to try to schedule the time. And when I saw how long it was, I was like, oh shit, I don't know if I have time to get into this. But you have a lot of really detailed charts in your book, and we were kind of joking before we got on that it felt like you were the in those movies like Deep Cover, where there's a big pyramid of bad guy drug dealers that the undercover cop has to infiltrate till he gets to the top. It felt like you had one of these charts in your house, because the research that you did, you said it took 5 years in the book. You say it took to do that?
Well, I had a book called Giants, the Global Power Elite, 5 years ago.
Mm.
So this is a follow-up to that. And it continues to look at how wealth has concentrated and is continuing to concentrate very rapidly in the world. So the upper 0.5% of the people are getting massively richer. And the rest of us are basically holding our own or decline. Most people in the world are in decline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a declining person, I will agree. You open your book by discussing the role of the transnational capitalist class in managing world wealth. Could you explain how these titans influence economic and political systems globally? In the book, you write the transnational capitalist class manages the world's wealth and makes decisions on capital investment strategies that benefit its collective interests. How does this dynamic impact economic policy? Can you break it down for the people?
Well, the concept of a transnational capitalist class has really just emerged over the last 2 decades from a number of scholars. William I. Robinson certainly be one of the top. He's a UC Santa Barbara sociology professor. And what it entails is that as wealth gets concentrated and individuals become richer, there's 2,600 billionaires in the world today. And of course, we know about Bezos and that, and $200 billion worth of wealth, and so that concentration of wealth is money. Although oftentimes people are defined about the value of their stocks and that kind of stuff. When I'm talking about capital, I'm talking about money. So excess capital, somewhere around in the world around 100 trillion plus, is primarily owned by the 0.5%, 40 million people, 35 million plus millionaires, multimillionaires, and then the billionaires. And they have this capital, and they give that capital over to capital management companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street. These are companies that manage capital. And their goal, of course, is to get an 8+% return on the capital. So what I've seen now is my book Giants 5 years ago. I looked at the 17 capital management companies that had assets under management, AUMs, of over $1 trillion. And there were 17 of them at the time. They collectively controlled $41 trillion worth of wealth, which to me was shocking at that time. And what we've seen in the past 5 years is not only a doubling of that, a concentration, even more so. So now there are $31 trillion investment management companies. They control a total of $83 trillion worth of wealth. Some people, it's hard to think of what a trillion is. I mean, it's 1,000 billions.
You break it down very, very good in the book, where you try to explain, because sometimes I forget how big a trillion is because numbers are thrown around all the time, especially when we talk about like the federal debt and things like that, or how much money, for example, is going to Israel. Let's say the way the billion is thrown around, it seems like maybe it's not as big as it really is, and it feels like, and you probably would know this better than anyone on the screen. Do we have more billionaires now than we've had in any other time in history?
Yeah, billionaires have continued to increase. And we have about 600 in the United States. The Chinese have about 500, which is quite amazing. Their billionaires, of course, don't get to invest in the government and tell the government what to do, whereas ours are very politically involved. It's really increased and solidified the numbers of people and the wealth that they control. And these capital management companies, the top 10 today, control $50 trillion worth of wealth. So that's 50,000 billions. And they invested everything. One of their biggest problems is they've got more money than they got safe places to invest it. So, any company that's stable and showing a profit, they're going to be invested in it, whether it's General Motors or even small companies all over the world. And so that capital investment, their boards of directors are the people that decide where it's going to be invested. And those are the people I call the titans, because they have such control over the wealth of the world in terms of where it will be invested and how it will be used. That's I think extremely important. I mean, considering that we have, half the world living on less than $6 a day, and literally 80% of the world lives on $10 a day. To have these people controlling billions of dollars and where it's invested and how it's and what kind of returns are going to be taken on it, it's just so concentrated, and it's doubled in the past 5 years. The concentration has doubled. So this trend of wealth concentration in the world today is very concerning to me. It increases inequality, and it's can't continue to go on. Um, they make mistakes like the subprime mortgage investments. They knew that those weren't safe, but they invested in them anyway because they had more capital. They needed to invest it somewhere. So they're also very politically involved. They would love to see Russia opened up to capital investment after the Soviet Union collapsed. There for a while, Westerners could openly invest in Russia, but they still do, but it's kind of closed now, especially the Russians became involved in the war in Ukraine, and so they're unable to invest in Russia to the extent that they would like to. So they would love to see a regime change there. They'd like to see Putin out. They would like to see the Chinese Communist Party pushed out so that they could invest everywhere in the world. I mean, this is one of the reasons the U.S. has military bases everywhere in the world is to protect global capital. And that's a very concerning thing for me.
Pascal, do you want to add?
Yeah. Peter, there was a moment in 2016 with the rise of Bernie Sanders that there seemed to be this flashpoint with the global elite in which there was a burgeoning interest in the concept of socialism and concern about wealth and equality in ways that I had not seen in my lifetime. There was a kind of new left, if you will, of people largely under 40 who had thought about concepts like wealth inequality and capitalist realism and the excesses of capitalism, largely because they were kind of a socially demobilized precariat of college graduated youth, that they, for the first time, probably since the New Left of the 60s, started to think about challenging capitalism. Do you think that moment has passed us by and that basically we're back to business as usual? And the idea of having this kind of cadre of burgeoning socialists, if you will, if you want to call them that, is over, and it's basically that, and that the bad guys have won, and it's business as usual moving forward?
Well, wealth has won in the sense that it continues to be concentrated and held by fewer people, and it's bypassing all of us. When you talk about 5, 6 years ago, I mean, the Occupy movement was certainly part of manifestation of that period, and the elites were terrified of the Occupy movement. They really, closed doors, telling the government to stop it, to undermine it. Police forces all over the country, infiltrated every Occupy organization that existed, and it was undermined and repressed and denigrated in the mainstream media, and literally put down. So when movements like that emerge or happen, um, the elites are fully aware that they are a small minority of people in a world of vast inequality, and where half the people are, literally just malnourished. Half the world population is malnourished, and 20,000 people a day are dying from malnutrition or easily curable diseases. Um, so that's a fact that so every day, 20,000 or more people die because of inequality. And to me, that is absolutely wrong, and that we need to adjust and reflect on that and do something about it. Now, in the book, I name the 117 titans who are the directors of the 10 largest capital investment companies. I name them by name, where they went to college, um, who they work for,
Yeah.
and their public net wealth. They're all multimillionaires, and many of them have managed companies of their own. And these 117 people, they all know each other or know of each other for sure. Those 10 companies are all cross invested in each other to the tune of $350 billion a year. So, of cross investments. So they're watching what everybody's doing. This is a core center of global capitalism and money being managed by a very small number of people, fully aware of where they're investing and what they're doing. And they're just all their other companies, they're all in 2 or 3 other boards of directors. So somebody's on General Motors, or some of them are on Google's board and that sort of thing. Collectively, their boards, of these 117 people, their companies that they're on the boards, they have a $5.3 trillion annual income on these other companies. So that's an amount of money that's larger than GDP of all the nations in the world except for China, the US, and Japan. So I mean, this wealth concentration, it's terrifying to me that it's going to continue to happen, and that they will literally be buying up everything or controlling everything of any value in the world. And that represses all of us. It makes us all poorer. And it's very undemocratic for sure. They're not fans of democracy at all, especially when it comes to publicly deciding how the world's wealth should be used. They control it. They want to continue to control it. They want to be able to control all the wealth in the world at some point. And that becomes oligarchic, to say the least.
Do you think that moment that happens around 2016, because I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, Pascal, the kind of Bernie Sanders moment of 2016, where let's say socialism stops being a bad word for a lot of people. Do you think that moment is over? Where
Not
people
at
are,
all.
you think it's still going?
That moment is not over. The moment is going to be with us until this whole situation gets corrected, or we have an absolutely monarchy of control over, in a police state, which, as they continue to concentrate wealth, they're going to have to put together. And in many ways, they already have. So that's the danger that we're faced with. And so we have to say no to that and engage in publicly telling them, you can see all their names, you could write all of them and say, it's time to fix this. We got to stop having people starve in the world today. The wealth is more than adequate to feed everybody, to take care of everybody in the world at a minimum standard of living. It's very possible, and it needs to be done, just for humanitarian purposes, let alone beliefs in socialism.
In chapter 2 of your book, Who Controls World Capital, this chapter presents the staggering growth of capital held by investment firms. Can you elaborate on how this consolidation impacts wealth distribution? You write, in 2022, these 33 giants controlled a collective AUM of, was it asset? Was it asset? Was it
Under
AUM?
management.
Asset under management.
Asset management, yeah.
Of 83.212 trillion. How does this compare historically? And what does that mean?
There's no comparison. It's doubled in the last 5 years.
Jesus.
It's accelerating. wealth concentration is massively accelerating. Um, the richest 1% grabbed 2/3 of the new wealth since 2020. And so, in the rest of the world, the 99% of us,
Mhm.
some in the upper 10% or so had some wealth increase, was very minor compared to the 1%, and the rest of the world is in decline. And that can't go on. I mean, with half the people living in semi-poverty or homelessness or the threat of and no health care, we have several 100 million people in the world who are living in extreme poverty. Now, extreme poverty is defined by the United Nations as living on $2.15 a day. So imagine that. I mean, imagine trying to live on $2 a day. And that extreme poverty for a while was going down. And so the elites were all excited that, oh, look, we're sharing and it's all gonna get better, and extreme poverty is in decline. Extreme poverty, the only place it declined was in China. The Chinese deliberately eliminated extreme poverty in their country.
Mhm.
They took 700 plus million people out of extreme poverty. They're still poor. They live on like $5 a day, but they're not living on $2 a day anymore. So, and that was deliberate. So the Chinese could do it. The rest of the world could do it as well. I mean, there's no reason that people in the modern world should be living on $2 a day or even $5 a day. There's more than enough to feed everybody, take care of everybody, give them adequate shelter and care, and provide health care for everybody. That must be done for very strong humanitarian and human value. Universal Declaration of Human Rights is quite clear on that everybody is entitled to a decent standard of living, a place to stay, adequate food and nutrition. And all the nations of the world have signed on to the Declaration of Human Rights. We just don't implement it, or we don't address the issues as it is in decline as to why. Why is because the rich are hoarding wealth at even greater levels, and it's got to be turned around.
Pascal?
Yeah, can you talk about the effects of COVID in this wealth accrual of the 1%, and how that facilitated an exacerbated transfer of wealth upward, and why that was exactly?
The 1% that control this wealth sit on policy councils all over the world. And, the World Economic Forum is basically a big policy council, started some 30 years ago, where the top 1,000 heads of the top richest corporations were invited to start going to Davos. Now it's been expanded, and there's thousands of people that go every year. These are the upper class people of the world, and government leaders. The Chinese are heavily involved now. And the World Economic Forum is saying, okay, we have these problems of inequality and the environment in particular, global warming, and we need to address issues and start to do something about it. Well, so they come up with a standard of environment, social, and government, ESG, that they say that is going to be their standard that'll make the world a better place. And these investment funds started to have places where you could put your money into funds that were supposedly ESG oriented. But it hasn't, wealth inequality has just increased. Extreme poverty has gone down. Global warming is still a major threat. In fact, the oil companies in the world have doubled how much oil they're selling. And the Titans alone, those 10 companies have over 400 billion invested in the world oil companies. So they're funding it. They're funding Standard Oil and Chevron and Exxon and to continue to produce oil and gas and to continue to burn it. They have hopes of creating carbon dioxide sucking machines that will sort of try to clean up the air. But Gore says it's just a ridiculous concept. So they're hoping that there'll be technological fixes, but that's not happening. And there's no reversal. Global warming is continuing, as we know from our just looking, outside on a daily basis. I mean, we had double the numbers of days over 100 here in Sacramento, California, than we used to have 5-10 years ago. So, I mean, this is seriously hurting the world.
Can you talk a little bit about that? The machines that are supposed to suck out the pollution. What is it called? Where they buy so they can burn so much fossil fuel. I can't think of the name.
Oh, the credits. So you can buy.
Yes, they buy the credits. Yeah.
Like
can you explain that process, like real quick?
Well, publicly owned places such as a forest around a city, capital can invest and say that we're going to protect that forest.
Yeah.
And so they'll put money into saying that's going to invest to be protected. They get credits for that so that they can pollute more by putting money into it's a boondoggle.
Are they called offset credits or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not stopping global warming, and it just enriches the wealthy. And it's another propaganda mechanism that they try to say that we're doing something. That's what, to me, ESG from the World Economic Forum is nothing more than a propaganda ploy to continue global capital concentration and to continue. It's supposed to be a nice capitalism.
Yeah.
And it's not. The numbers are quite clear. I mean, just the idea that 8 million people a year die from smoking, from tobacco. And the Titans have $103 billion invested in the 5 largest tobacco companies, including the one in China, that is killing all these people. So,
which is so interesting.
It has very negative impacts.
Which I find interesting that you bring that up, because kind of this idea that you can like litigate these people into doing better. For those that don't remember, there was a massive lawsuit against the tobacco lobby over false advertising. If you were someone like me, I'm 47, but I grew up watching 70-year-olds television, living with my grandparents for a short time. So if you lived in the Bay Area in the 80s, I don't know if you're in the 80s in the Bay, Peter, but there was a channel called TV 20, and when they would show like a Twilight Zone marathon, they would show the commercials. So I grew up watching just the camel a day keeps the doctor away, and cigarettes weren't unhealthy things. There was literally a lifestyle thing to sell people.
It was a lifestyle thing, and
with no health risks.
Brands.
Right, with no health risks whatsoever. To kind of expand that point, because I don't think people really understand what I'm saying. Go watch any sports highlights before the 70s, and you can see players smoking on the sideline. Hall of Famer quarterback,
sure. Absolutely.
Lynn Dawson smoking at the halftime.
You watch a movie and they'll warn you in advance that this is rated PG because people are smoking.
It's that lawsuit.
But we don't have to make cigarettes. I mean, $100 billion invested in tobacco companies that the Titans have. They're getting a profit return on that, and it's a profit on death. There's no other way to say it. I mean, the same thing about alcohol.
Yeah.
In America today, there's 24 million alcoholics. They drink an average of 74 drinks a week. So that's hard liquor, beer, wine. I mean that's a heavy consumption.
Yeah.
And so when they they're 10% of the drinkers. They buy half the alcohol in the country. And this is worldwide. So the Titans have 60 billion invested in the alcohol producers in the world. Half of their income from that is from alcoholics. So, these are people who are continue to drink, will die and will get cirrhosis, they'll get sick. I mean, it's a poison at that level. Yet they're continuing to make those kind of investments. So, they invest in the oil companies. And one of the biggest investors for the Titans is companies that manufacture weapons.
Mhm.
Preparation for war, $260 billion in the top 10 Western military companies. And that includes all wars. So I just finished a report on the Titans and their investments in the companies that are profiting from the war in Israel.
Mhm.
And huge amounts, the cross investments, billions, and profits from the genocide war that's happening there. Titans are making money off of it. And so any aspect of war that they're building, and they're getting a return on actual war and or the threat of war. So building war machines and paying for them, and bombs and that. The 2,000-pound bombs that the Israelis are dropping on Gaza are made in the U.S.
Pascal?
Yeah, one of the things that I find interesting is that you talk about the military-industrial complex in your book, and I'm thinking about this current election where we have Raytheon. Not only do we have Raytheon being the former employer of our current Secretary of Defense, but it's one of the largest donators to the Kamala Harris campaign, in light of the fact that they are also helping underwrite this kind of genocide in Gaza. You talk about the Titans and the use of the military-industrial complex and manufacturing weapons of all sorts. How exactly does this escape the consciousness of the average American when we are always presented with this kind of glorious vision of capitalism as being the ultimate fantasy of every American's dream to live, the lifestyle of the 1%, when it causes so much immiseration in the world, particularly when it comes to weapons?
Weapons and global warming and pollution. It has vast negative consequences for all people. And I mean, the Titans are going to have grandkids, and their grandkids may not be able to live in a world that's overheated. This is ongoing. You would think that they would have some consciousness around that. I think maybe they believe their own propaganda that there will be technological innovations that can remediate the problem, but it's not forthcoming. And if we continue to use those, burn up and put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's ultimately going to heat the planet up so much that it won't be habitable. That's the degrees to which things are, let alone building more weapons. Nuclear bombs are continuing to be built, many of them right in New Mexico at Los Alamos. They're building new pits there. That's the core for a nuclear weapon. And they upgrade nuclear weapons constantly, billions of dollars. And when I lived in Albuquerque, I found out that the air base there, Kirkland Air Force Base, that's where they store all the surplus weapons. There's like 2,000 nuclear weapons stored in right there, which was unpleasantly surprising. The Veterans for Peace are very active there and very aware of what's going on. New Mexico has been the target for right from the beginning for nuclear growth and expansion with Los Alamos. So that ongoing building these weapons that inevitably are a poison to the world, and if ever used would kill us all, within years. if even, and I'm a strong advocate of unilateral withdrawal from nuclear weapons. That the United States, we're the only ones that's ever used them, and that we should dismantle all of our nuclear weapons completely. And they say, oh, well, then they'll attack us, or they'll, no. I mean, if they drop nuclear weapons on us, it'll create nuclear winter in the world that'll kill everybody. So I mean, they can't. They're a no-win weapon. No one can survive that, and they've got to be eliminated in the world. And the money that we're putting into it could easily offset global poverty and starvation. So I mean, these are the choices that capital money being used are being put into. And the number one priority has to be human beings and not profit. I say that quite strongly. I mean, that's what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Pascal?
No, continue. Go ahead.
I didn't know if you wanted to disagree.
No, I agree.
No, I know. In Chapter 3, the World Economic Forum, in discussing the World Economic Forum's stakeholder capitalism, I love the way they try to change the name of capitalism as well to make it sound like this ain't your daddy's capitalism. This is new stakeholder capitalism, and we care about you. You question the sincerity of corporations promising environmental and social responsibility. What do you see as some of the main flaws of stakeholder capitalism? In the book you write, the WEF, the World Economic.
It's not changing anything.
Yeah. It's the same thing with a different name.
The same thing. Yeah, they're just trying to make us all feel a little bit better, and we're thinking about it. There's a poly crisis is the terminology that they use. A poly crisis that we're concerned about, and we want to make adjustments. Well, they're not adjusting. The oil and gas are still being spent and produced at higher rates, higher levels. Weapons and war is still threatening or continue to being built and expanded. People are dying from starvation and malnutrition every day in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's increased, not decreased. Extreme poverty has increased in the world. A couple 100 million just in the last 4 years. So that's not a better capitalism. It's a continuation of capitalism and the inequality and the environmental damage and the threat of global war that we've had all along.
Is the branding effective in making people think that this is a different way, and maybe this capitalism will right the wrongs of the previous bad capitalism?
The branding is working, obviously. They're getting away with it. But my book I'm quite clear with that, and I give plenty of good numbers and facts that it's betterment is not happening.
Mm-hmm. Pascal, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I mean, I've heard that term before, stakeholder capitalism. What is it actually trying to connotate? That they have a stake in the betterment of the world?
Yep.
Yeah, they're trying to say that companies need to be thinking about who the stakeholders are, not just the shareholders, but stakeholders.
Right.
And so it's a broadened concept of what corporations are supposed to be. They're supposed to be caring for people in a broader way. It hasn't changed a thing. And it's simply muddied the waters in terms of understanding the real contradictions that exist in capitalism and concentrated wealth today.
That's where it's interesting to me, the branding that these quote unquote titans always do with we're going to call that what you're doing, sir. We're going to call that casino capitalism, and that's why that's bad. Or we're going to call this neoliberal capital. We're going to find a name for it, and we can gender it. We can put an ethnicity on the back of it, but it's always capitalism. And it feels like this this stakeholder thing they try to say is something I've actually heard in conversations with like everyday people that don't necessarily engage with this type of material. That is, kind of back to the cigarettes thing, especially post the lawsuit, when these tobacco companies are putting out their part of the agreement was they had to make all these ads that showed how bad their products was. And I always thought to myself, I don't think these ads are working the way they were intended to work. And also, it feels like this level of propaganda works because the simplistic view of this is, why would these people want to kill off their customer base? And I think what you're writing in this book is these people have no problem killing off their customer base. To your earlier point of these people have grandchildren when they want a world for them to live in. And I don't think they care. How do you get that across kind of to people that don't always
I
engage?
guess they believe their own propaganda. That's all I can think.
Mhm.
They just haven't looked at it hard, the realities of it. And I mean, each of these titans is involved in various policy councils and planning associations, and that 2/3 of them go to the World Economic Forum in Davos every year. A lot of them, like Larry Fink, he's on the, not only goes to Davos every year, but he's on the International Business Council. He's on the Business Roundtable. He's the director on the Council of Foreign Relations in New York. So these are high-level policy planning groups that set the agendas for governments. And you're running for president, you pay attention to what the Council of Foreign Relations is saying. And so they pay staff, and they put money towards planning to make sure that capital business is protected. So when the government talks about we want to protect our vital interests, then they don't say we want to protect rich people. What they mean is we're going to protect the capital, concentrated capital of the world. That's our vital interests. And that's why we have military bases and a central intelligence agency, to protect our vital interests.
Mm-hmm. Pascal?
One of the things I find interesting is in the current iteration of the reactionary right, there's a segment of the right that actually, quote unquote, distrusts this global capital elite. Comically, Steve Bannon used to talk about the party of Davos, and how the crony capitalists who rule the 1%. And what's ironic to me is that, of course, we know that the right, particularly the Republican right, has always traditionally been considered to be the party of capital, the party of big business. What do you think has caused this shift in perception by this new reactionary right? Is there actually a new reactionary right, or is it just a talking point that you see people like J.D. Vance who's talking about, like, the dangers of big business going and run amok? How much integrity do you think exists in this shift of rhetoric on their part, and are they actually interested in getting to the crux of the problem, as you do in your book about these titans of capital?
Well, what I've observed, that the right is denigrating the government a great deal, that they talk about the deep state, meaning that there's a conspiracy among capital elites and the state to control the world. There's not a conspiracy. It's just the way things are. It's up front. And if the right wants to make it sound like a conspiracy, I mean, they see the inequalities as well. They understand, how government is managed and manipulated. But they took the concept of the deep state from Peter Dale Scott's book on the deep state, and he never said that it was a permanent thing. He said that elites at various times of crisis would come together and move and manipulate events and things to make sure that things went the way that they wanted them to happen. But the right has assumed that this is sort of like this permanent state of being that, and that all people in government are suspicious, and we have to, throw it out with the bathwater, so to speak. And that's another extreme form of anti-communism, the extreme right, going back to the 50s and that. And in many ways, it's sort of manifestation of the mentality of the Ku Klux Klan. So that, and it could be very racist. So Trump's MAGA has picked up on a lot of that.
Yeah.
Their right wing, stuff, and they're. I hope they get beat up really bad over it. We'll see.
Well, they just had their KKK Coachella recently at Madison Square Garden, so
right,
there's that. You end your book with a call for democratic activism to counterbalance elite power. What strategies do you recommend for confronting the entrenched power of these titans? You argue our responsibility as humanitarian global citizens is to build grassroots democratic structures. How feasible do you see this in today's climate? And the most important question, where can people begin, in your opinion?
It's always feasible, and has happened numbers of times in U.S. history and history of the world. Revolutions occur, often middle class or working class people who have been blocked in opportunity growth become leaders of revolutionary movements. Any sort of group where it's mobilizing young people to challenge the establishment can be threatening. It can grow. It can just beyond leaps and bounds very rapidly. So when you study social movements, events can happen that facilitate a social movement, whether it's a Rodney King or anything else that can kick off resistance and people saying enough of this and we want change. That I hope happens. It's hard to organize that. We can organize, and for me, writing a book about who the elites are, how they control wealth, how concentrated it is, and naming them is my contribution to any potential social movement that would arise that's challenging inequality. And that's why I do it. And I think that the more we know about who these people are and the amount of wealth that they control and the misinformation, they control the media, they own the media. In my book, Giants, I talk about how the media and how they're invested in the corporate media. And so we are propagandized on a daily basis in support of free market capitalism, and very few challenges to that occur within the media systems that are out there.
Pascal, you want to follow up on that?
No, I really want to tell you that I'm very impressed with the book in terms of you laying out who the culprits are and how they maintain their power. It's just, I wonder how we can actually create an alternative to this paradigm and awaken the consciousness of the average citizen so that we can challenge this entrenched power, because I worry that something like capitalist realism just it's just so easy for us to assume that, well, this is the way it's always been. And this is, it's not the way it's always been. It's been getting precipitously worse. And that inertia becomes an obstacle to people actually challenging the forces that are blocking change from happening.
Well,
we educate and we mobilize and we challenge every way that we possibly can. And that's what we can do. And you guys are doing that with this show. in a very strong way. I do it by writing books and articles, and we encourage democratic socialists, people who are aware of the changes that are needed. I say we support the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think that's a vital part of any social movement that we use. If we use that declaration, and you go back to when it was put together right after World War II with Eleanor Roosevelt and a whole number of top scholars in the world, it's a pretty strong document. And I encourage people, and in fact, in Giants, I reproduce the whole thing. It's just there. I encourage people not only know what the Declaration of Human Rights says, but to make it part of any social movement that's going to manifest change.
Well, again, wherever you're watching or listening to the show, there's links in the description to the book, Titans of Capital, How Concentrated Wealth Transforms Humanity. Pascal, do you have any parting words for our guest?
No, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Hopefully you'll be willing to come on again.
Well, I hope so too, and continue to keep this kind of questions going and this sort of effort open and available to people everywhere.
Well, at this point, it's all we know how to do. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a very good evening out there in lovely California, the most beautiful state in the union. Just want to let everybody know. California, greatest place in the world. Have a very good night, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Phillips, Peter Phillips, all of Wilson Phillips. Have a very good night, all the Phillipses. Pascal, I'm going to the champagne room. Are you going to join me?
Yes, I will join you.
No, you're not. You really going to join me?
Yeah, I want to join you. I'm not going to stay. I'm not staying too long, but I'll join you.
What? If you are a patron, the link is already up for the champagne room. If you are a paid YouTube subscriber, the link is already up for the champagne room. If you want to join Pascal and I to continue this conversation to talk about way more crazy stuff, I'll probably give you a little bit of a preview of what the show is going to be tomorrow with Derek Vaughn, where they talk about Israel, Lebanon, and a possible war with Iran. Shamu says free champagne. No, Sean. No free champagne. Sometimes you got to pay the bills. I do want to read some of the good comments from the show. I've been trying to save the comments for the show so I can read them at the end as well as super chats. First comment. This guy is like if Marx was Santa Claus. That's pretty funny. He did look like Santa Marx. Make your money work for you, they say, but money doesn't work. People do. That's graft. I think he means grift. I think that was a typo, but I get it, Deathbird. I agree with you. Bay Planner says Sacramento had 100 days of 100 degrees. Fuck. That's ridiculous because there's like no trees in Sacramento. Michael Parenti famously said, the trick to getting rich isn't to work hard. The trick to getting rich is to get other people to work hard for you. He was not praising this process at all. That was by Thomas Frank's biggest fan, Sean Moon. Steve said, Alex Jones told me the WEF were Marxist, the World Economic Forum were Marxist. You telling me that's not true? Alex Jones said that, Pascal?
Yeah, he says that kind of stuff.
That is ridiculous. Are they still on the whole everybody's a communist thing? Or are they finally done with that?
No, they still do that one. Trump still talks like that.
That's so crazy. Everyone I don't like is
a Kamala Harris a communist.
Wow. Like what? Like why? Just because of her dad?
Probably.
You can't have it both ways, Trump. You can't say their dads aren't in the home and then say her dad had that much influence on her. Make up your mind, Donald. What kind of racist are you going to be? Don't be a contradictory racist. They're confident that there will be technological innovation sufficient to keep people in their class alive. I think this was during our conversation about pollution. I agree, Deathbird. We had a great super chat from Virtuoso. Crony capitalism is just capitalism with a fake mustache as a disguise. I love that. He followed up with like one of those Pringles mustaches. Another comment from Steve. The right wingers talk a good game, but when you ask what's the solution, they say the market. That is 100% true.
Yep.
Everything. Tony Red, step one, in my honest opinion, go back and actually read Marx instead of reading about Marx. Thank you for all those wonderful comments. Pascal and I are going to the champagne room. We'll be there shortly. And we are
Out.